Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the City of Titusville Community Redevelopment Agency meeting of July 10th, 2018. I will call this meeting to order. We have a quorum. If you will, anyone would like to say the invocation? If not, join me in a moment of silence, please. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item of business is approval of the minutes from the CRA meeting on June 12th, 2018. Do I have anybody would like to make a motion? Any corrections? Or
Second.
I have a motion and a second. I hear no corrections. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Special recognitions and presentations. We have none of those this evening? Okay. Old business, Mr. Executive Director.
Yes, sir. Before I get to old business, I'd like to remind the CRA board to please speak into your microphone. As part of our recording, we're doing closed captioning. So if you're not speaking into the microphone, there will be a void for those that need closed captioning. So please, when you speak, make sure that your microphone's available to you and that you're speaking into it. Item 7A is the old business. It's the CRA building grant programs, policies, and procedures. This item was tabled on June 12, 2018 at the CRA meeting due to a lack of time needed to adequately discuss and provide direction to staff on the item. At the January 9, 2018 CRA property owners workshop meeting and subsequent CRA meeting discussions for the FY 2019 budget, the public voiced the need to expand the CRA building incentive grants program to incentivize new construction and to reactivate the commercial beautification program. At its April 2018 meeting, the CRA recommended approval of a proposed 2019 budget, which included $100,000 for building grants program. The building grants program was to include, in addition to the existing commercial interior renovation incentive grant program, a new construction incentive grant program, and a reactivated downtown commercial beautification grant program. Staff is recommending that CRA board discuss and approve the draft policies and procedures for the following CRA building grants program: a new permit and impact fee incentive program, a revised commercial interior building renovation incentive program, and reactivation of the revised downtown commercial beautification program. Mr. Ford's here to answer any questions on the three items that are before you.
Would anybody like to ask any questions?
Please.
Absolutely.
Mr. Ford, we discussed this yesterday, but I'm going to go ahead and ask you to repeat what you told me yesterday. There is a difference between the beautification grant and the interior grant. And you were explaining to me the reasons behind that. And basically what I was looking at was the beautification grant. If there was a sale of the property, the money had to be paid back at a pro rata X amount per year.
Yeah, the reimbursement clause.
Right.
And I'm hoping to get input tonight from the board on this. The previous grant that we had the reimbursement clause. And I believe the reason for this was that these are more cosmetic kinds of things that are being done to the building or the property. Things like signage and landscaping and paint, fencing and awnings that can be easily removed or may not last as long or as permanent as some of the other grant program.
Okay.
And I think of course I wasn't here, but I think what the rationale was that a building owner could take advantage of the grant, fix up their property real quick, and then turn around and sell it and make more of a profit. Now, that's the rationale that I see in that. Now, you can also take the rationale that, so what? They're fixing up the property, they're selling it, they're increasing the value of the property, and that's increasing the value of the tax roll.
Okay.
So you can look at it both ways. And the other grant programs, which are more permanent with interior and new construction, those are very long-term kind of improvements that will last with the building for hopefully many, many, not only years, but decades.
So what is the reimbursement schedule?
The reimbursement schedule is, over 5 years. If you sell your property, after 1 year, it's 80% of whatever the grant was, and then 2 years, it's 60%, and then it decreases after 3 years to 40%, and then 4 years down to 20%, and after 5 years, it is forgiven.
Okay. So that's the rationale behind that difference.
Correct.
Okay. And it would be up to us to decide if we want to do the reimbursement for both parts or not, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it would be up to you if you wanted to do that. I mean, right now, we're only, right now, it's in the existing facade grant or beautification grant because that's the way it previously was. The interior grant was approved without that clause because you were putting things such as plumbing and electrical work and AC ducts that, for the most part, tend to last a long time and add to the value of the building. So.
And then there's the one section 4 of the permit, ineligible projects and expenses. And I'm sort of curious about that. And I'm wondering if some of the stuff that's in here would not be allowed downtown anyway.
As based on our discussion, I've provided everybody with a matrix or a spreadsheet of those uses that are listed that are being proposed as ineligible and how they fall, what their status is on the zoning code, whether they're permitted, permitted with limitations, a conditional use, or not permitted at all. Some of those uses don't promote, the redevelopment plan principles of, being walkable, providing active street life, such as private clubs would not be open to the public. So why would you want to give public funds for a building that wouldn't be open to the public? Some of the uses in the redevelopment plan update talk about the poor image of the city in the downtown. So things like used car lots, vehicles for hire, which would include towing yards, et cetera, would be the rationale for not making them eligible. So, the other ones provide off-site impacts. That was because, maybe the large dance clubs that could create issues that, don't have restaurants. They're just somebody would build a very large, massive, building that would have lots of people in it that could create issues for the police department and for code enforcement.
So it looks like permitted uses would be drive-through facilities, convenience stores, used car businesses, and bars, nightclubs, et cetera, that serve alcohol but no food.
Depending on where they're located in the downtown zoning is divided up into 4 different sub-areas. The downtown, the
Right.
uptown, which is north of Garden Street, the midtown, which is south of South Street, and then the civic waterfront, which is basically from the 406 bridge and the bridge north, east of US 1.
Okay.
So in some cases, some uses are permitted in those areas, or they're not permitted, or they're conditional uses because of the distinct differences in them, such as the Midtown area has car dealerships. It's got a little heavier type of land use to it. The downtown has more of the buildings closer to the street,
Okay.
kind of things.
So the rationale for not allowing certain businesses in, is it because we're trying to promote a trail town, walkability, those kind of issues?
Yes, and it also to the point in the redevelopment plan where it talks about, you know, the poor image. I mean, they could go in, they just wouldn't be incentivized to be built, you know,
Okay.
as part of the grant. But that's another input item that we would need from the board. I mean, you could leave it as to if it's allowed by zoning, then it should be allowed per the grant. Or do you want to be more proactive and limiting and limit some of those uses that you may not want to incentivize?
Okay,
So.
I appreciate it.
Before I go any further, I understand there's a card on this item or on this section. Is it on a particular section?
It just says 7A. It's Tom Altiff.
It's on what? I'm sorry.
It's on this item.
It's on this item? Well, then, call that card, please, Mr. Alfred.
Tom Altiff.
Good evening.
Good evening.
The first thing I want to do is thank the city manager, city staff, and all the employees because we've been named a trail town.
Absolutely.
And we're only the second city in the state of Florida to be named a trail town. I think it's fantastic. One of my thoughts and a suggestion is that on the grant program, that we attach another a clawback provision on that. And that is when the renovation's complete and the funds have been dispersed to the owner of the property, that if they don't rent the property within 6 months, they pay back the grant. And my thought on that is someone can renovate their property and just sit on it and wait for the value to continue to increase. I think 6 months is a sufficient time to lease their property. I think it's a provision that will stimulate property owners to do something with their property. In addition to that, I passed out some exhibits, and they deal with a vacant property ordinance. Many cities, large and small, have used the vacant property ordinance to encourage property owners to renovate their properties, to bring them up to code, and to make them leasable or saleable. And with that, on Exhibit 1, it kind of gives what the intention is, which is to encourage owners of vacant properties to immediately rehabilitate the property or to sell the property to an individual or agency that will make the property attractive for sale or rental. I also furnished a list of all the cities in 2017 and in 2018 through June that have passed these ordinances. And so far, the feedback's been very good. For an example, if you look at the exhibit with the building, which would be 3-2, that building remained empty for 12 years in Brunswick, Maryland. The owner of the property was in Virginia, and apparently really didn't care if it was utilized or not, because he owns other properties in Virginia that he was developing.
Your time is up, but would you like extra time on this?
Yes, sir.
2 minutes?
About 3 minutes. 2 minutes.
Do I have a motion?
Whatever you
You have
want
the
to. Whatever you
motion.
want to grant me.
You have another 3 minutes. Sir.
Okay. Again, one of their objections was that it had the paper on the windows, and nothing was being done with it. And in addition to that, just very quickly, I know.
One second, I failed to ask for a vote on that. We had a
Oh, I'm
motion
sorry.
and a second. Everybody in agreement? Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. In addition to the vacancy ordinance for the CRA, which we're at now, of course, I included a photograph of another building, and perhaps the ordinance should be for the entire city. This is on Highway 50. Both signs have been blown out since the hurricane. You have tarps that are draped from the building hanging there. I mean, it just gives a terrible image. That's Exhibit 5 and 4. It's just a very terrible image for the city. It's one of our entranceways into Titusville, and people get an impression when they drive through as to what our city's all about. Most of these people would not allow it in their own backyard, but if it comes to a city where they're an out-of-city property owner, or if it's not affecting them, then they could care less. That's it. Thank you.
I have a question, because we just got this, and I haven't seen it. But our program is to basically do the same thing, encourage people to take care of their property and upgrade it, and we're paying 1/2 of an amount that's asked for. How does the program that you're referring to, how does that differ or work? Or?
Well, we have a great incentive program, but sometimes you have to have a disincentive as well. And some of these people will never apply for a grant to repair their property. I think there needs to be an ordinance such as this to encourage them to either bring their property up to code or to sell the property.
And how is that done? What's the impetus?
Okay, there's a registration fee, and the property is then opened to code enforcement to go in and look at the property. If the property is not up to code, the owner would have to bring it up to code. Now, at that point, the owner has a choice: bring it up to code, try to lease his building, his or her building, or sell the building.
So it would be determined by whether it's up to code or not?
Right. I mean, if it's up to code, there's nothing can be done except a registration fee.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Alford? Yes, please. These are.
On any of these towns that have this ordinance, do they have anything about when the person gets the grant, that instead of being reimbursed immediately, they have to be they get reimbursed once it's rented?
No, not to my knowledge, and I just dealt with the vacant building ordinance.
Right.
I didn't get into how their grant programs work, so I really can't answer the question.
Okay. Thank you.
You have a question?
Yeah. Mr. Brew, so if we had a grant program, but part of that grant was hinged on whether that building was occupied before they got the grant money, could we do that?
First of all, anything you do, I think first you need to define a public purpose. What are you trying to achieve with the grant?
You're trying to achieve a downtown area that is occupied and vibrant, as opposed to one that has abandoned buildings and no one in it.
Right, and there may be property owners that are owners that do not intend to rent their buildings, that get the facade grant money or the interior money, and they have additional things they're going to do to the property that may take more than 6 months, whether it's a restaurant and they're waiting for the kitchen ovens, or whether it's interior improvements that are not related to the grant as they're trying to attract business. You need to also remember, if you set an artificial time in which to rent it, you may be forcing them to not have the highest and best use. In other words, rent to the first person that comes
Right.
just to save the money. So there are things you need to think about when you're doing a program and when to put restrictions on somebody to rent a piece of property in a given period of time, as opposed to wanting the best tenant or a tenant that might have a use rather than the first one that comes. I mean, there's some things to think about, but there really needs to be thought out. We can certainly think these things through. If the CRA board is interested in those types of programs, we can certainly advise staff and we can go back and evaluate those and come back and discuss those items. But you really need to think through what you're achieving by doing that. What's the purpose, and why would there be a requirement that it be rented or within a certain period of time?
Or put to use.
All right, same thing with the
I
vacant.
mean, basically, you're looking at property crime is going to go down because you have people there that are in the building.
Obviously.
And, you know, it's hard to break into a building if there's people around. It's not an ideal situation if you're a thief.
Right, and I don't know how a code requirement is necessarily going to generate demand for someone to come and rent a building in the city. It might have an incentive for an owner to rent it, but then again, they'll be under the gun to rent it based on that grant money and having to pay it back. So they may not have the time to wait. There's maybe other variables, is what I'm suggesting, as you're looking at requirements you put on a program that you would want to consider.
Okay.
Same thing with the vacant registry. What's the purpose? You know, first you have to identify if you're going to create a law or if you're going to recommend that council do that. With the vacant registry requiring property owners to pay fees to register their properties merely because they're vacant. If you have a vacant property that is meeting code, but an individual may be holding that until interest rates are, you know, a little better, maybe they're waiting for a loan to come through, whatever they're doing as a business owner, is it a valid concern to require them to register if the property is in compliance and is not creating a blight? So those are things that we would think through.
Who was next? I think Mr. Leedy. The lights are separate to this thing, so, but go ahead. Kurt?
This vacant program that you're showing us from other cities, is that something you'd look at or you're talking to us about for the entire city or just the CRA?
I would recommend it for the entire city.
Okay.
I think it would be more effective.
So that would be something that, I mean, I think it's marvelous. I'm all supportive of you in that program and something that the city council, I think, needs to look at. I agree with the city attorney, having in my previous life been in commercial real estate development. I think artificial timeframes are tough, but you can put possibly to maybe that's something we can add later or discuss as a board and see how that shakes out a little bit, but would you be agreeable or look favorably on the idea of not just saying 6 months, but maybe at the time of application, the applicant has to demonstrate that there's a marketing plan going on for that property, whether it be sale or lease.
No, I agree with that, and I don't think it should be onerous and put too much of a burden on the property owner. But I think we do need some way to encourage property owners to do something with their property. It just doesn't make sense. Now, if it's up to code and they're just waiting to, there's been a couple instances already where properties have received funds and people have attempted to lease the properties. And the leases were such and the asking rate was such that, and I'm not going to name it, but Titusville is a small town, that it appears as if they're not leasing it because they want to actually sell it.
Right.
And I think if they get the grant, there should be some type of a time frame. I mean, you do something with it. Lease it, sell it, do something.
So you would be, and possibly our city attorney could come up with some kind of paragraph in the application or the rules section here that the owner stipulates that he's going to diligently pursue marketing or leasing the property, or, you know, we need to see activity that he's going to do something about it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Ms. Anderson?
Getting back to what Mrs. Nelson was speaking about, the vacant lands, I remember something about repoed houses and property had to be registered with code enforcement because of the maintenance and upkeep of them? Is that still in existence?
Correct. We have a vacant registry code that is in existence and is operating. This came about, with the foreclosures.
Right, 2008.
And various cities, in fact, I think most cities around the state, including the city of Titusville, recognize that when properties were declared to be in default by banks and became vacant because the bank sent a notice that we were foreclosing and the property owner then vacated the house, there was nobody to contact to work out compliance with. Because, your code officers, when you get a complaint of overgrowth, paint, broken windows, you contact a property owner and you attempt to achieve compliance. The problem is when you have a bank that has filed a foreclosure or declared default and the property owner has vacated, there's nobody to communicate with. And if anyone's tried to contact a bank and speak to a person, very difficult. So what we did is, as a city and others made those findings of fact that there was a problem with foreclosed properties and those in default because they were creating a blight with the overgrowth, and there was no way to reasonably achieve compliance. So the vacant registry primarily was to require them to designate a local contact person for us to work with to achieve code compliance. And they would register the properties, and the whole point was to designate a local person to deal with who had to be responsible for that compliance. It's a little different when you say you have just a vacant property that may be up to code who has a local property owner that we can talk to. So what is the necessity of a registration at that point? Because it's no longer dealing with that absent bank. And so what I said earlier is you need to find that public purpose behind why you require a registry. We did that with the vacant registry primarily because of the foreclosed and defaulting properties. And those are most of the registries you'll find in the state deal with foreclosed properties and registry of properties that are in default. So we did that analysis, but you're right, we do have that still for foreclosed properties that they're required to register their property.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I did for Mr.
Okay.
Alton. Tom, so with the idea of a clawback or some kind of a hinge on the back end, would you be agreeable to like a two-step process? So one would actually be for the lease of the property, the second be for occupancy?
Yes.
Right,
I mean,
okay.
absolutely. I don't want it to be too onerous on the property owner. But you had mentioned Houston when you were there, and this is exactly what Houston did to encourage vacant properties to be brought up to code and to be either rented or sold.
Yeah, I found it to be successful when applied. But.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll reserve other comments.
Question?
Well, yeah, first of all, I want to thank you, Tom, for having pictures of things on Highway 50. I think anything we do with the CRA is a good step towards something in the city, because clearly we are the CRA and that's what we focus on. But at the same time, I just talked to the city manager yesterday, I believe maybe it was 2 days ago, and one of the concerns I had was the Highway 50 corridor, the building you sent pictures of, Southway Plaza, and whatever it takes. When I ran just 18 months ago, one of the biggest concerns that I heard were empty buildings. The other one was bringing in restaurants, et cetera, and certainly we're working on both of those. But it's like if you were to play a chess game and I want to move the queen here, I can do that. But it seems like with empty buildings, I want to move that queen, but I've got to ask the other person to move in, and if he thinks he can, will he in 60 days? And it's so frustrating. And every time you come up, I listen intently because you have such great ideas, but implementing them seems to be just such a difficult thing to do, and I know that that's what you guys are working on. So let me just say that in a nutshell, I hope that we can take whatever we do with the CRA, and I hope we do something. I hope we can take it citywide, because we've certainly got some empty building issues.
Any other questions for Mr. Altus? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Back to the regular item, I have some lights on. Member Anderson, you were first.
Yes, Tim, these three ordinances, not ordinances, but programs, how much total annually have we budgeted for all three?
For the upcoming 2019 budget, we have $100,000 presently budget, and there will also be any carryovers from unspent funds. Last year, there was a $30,754 carryover. Right now, to date, we have $50,953 to get to the end of the fiscal year.
Okay.
What's unspent would be carried over into next year's budget as well. We also have, and you have to be careful because we don't know exactly how much it will be, but there would also be some fund balance that may or may not be available to be used if a project comes in and you really think it's a home run project that might be able to apply.
The $100,000 is just the building grant, correct?
The $100,000 is for all three programs.
All three. Okay.
So
that's
there will
what I
be, it
was
will be
confused.
very competitive.
Okay. We have anybody waiting in the wings for these?
I
Evidently not.
believe there are some people that have expressed some interest.
Okay.
I know that there's one coming in for the interior grant, and then they're waiting to see about for the facade grant come October 1st.
And how do we let our shopkeepers and property owners know that these grants are available?
You can advertise it. We put it on the websites. In the past, we have sent letters out to the businesses or property owners.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we first created the interior program, because I got many phone calls about it.
Mm-hmm.
Some even, they went to residential property owners as well, but they said, sorry, no, they're only for commercial type properties or for the interior program.
Okay, thank you.
Member Leedy?
Mr. Ford, is there, I was looking at section 5, numbers 8 and 9, and I had written down on the front page before that, is there any way one individual could apply for all three grants and wipe out the $100,000 in one shot? And I could see where a guy could say, I've got new construction next to my building that's constructed, and I'm going to use 50 grand here, but that section right there, that takes care of that problem, right?
Where specifically are you talking about?
Well, if you look at section 5 program criteria, numbers 8 and 9.
What page?
6 on mine.
Page 6 of 47?
It's 6 of 11. 13 of 47.
13 of 47, 6 of 11. Numbers 8 and 9.
Which grant program are you talking about?
All of them. I mean, I'm saying there's 3, I'm thinking in my mind there's 3 grants.
Correct.
And so an individual, I walk into your office and say, I want 50 grand for new construction permits. I want 40 grand for interior. That's 90. That almost wipes it out. I'm just asking you, in that section 5 points 8 and 9, does that eliminate that particular problem?
Again, I'm not finding where you're at, but if somebody's getting a new construction grant, they would not be eligible for interior construction because that is for older established buildings that were built prior to the building code being enacted.
Hear my example again.
Okay.
He owns a lot, and he's got a building on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's the criteria. And then he's got a lot next to it with nothing on it. He wants to put new construction on the lot next to it, and he wants to do the interior of the building that's next to that. And he owns it, so he could take.
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk about, I think that's not right. One individual can wipe out the whole thing.
But anything over $10,000 would have to come before the board for you to approve that?
Yeah, but I think the applicant should know before they come to a board, it should be in some kind of a rule. And that's what I'm asking you, because it says here, and for those on the dais, it says, there may be no more than one approval for a project funding every 2 years. no more than one approval. A project that is defined as a single or set of enhancements, renovation activities for an eligible property. And then number 9, it says the total amount of grant funds available for any one property under this program is 50 grand.
You're maxed out, correct?
So that's what gets to the problem that I just created, right?
I believe so.
Okay,
If I,
wow.
if I understand properly.
All right, okay.
So.
Thank you all.
Yes, sir. Vice Chairman?
Thank you. And this is to staff and also city attorney, you can clear me up. So I think generally with some of the recommendations or considerations that we're taking forward, one is when we talk about defining a public purpose. And I think that anything that we've talked about up until this point, when we look at the past 20 years of multiple CRA studies, city studies, economic development studies, every single one of them has come back with a vibrant downtown. And that is the removal of blight, quality of life, and so on and so on. So I think just from fidelity, we've been given decades of data that says the downtown being vibrant is, I think, a benefit to the city. So I think that just substantiates the reason and cause. And the inverted argument to that is fine, pull everything out, and we see what we have left, which is blight, and it digresses. So that, I think, clarifies the public purpose for what we're talking about. For staff, Mr. Ford, and to the board, I'm very agreeable to the idea of follow-up criteria. And so with the mention of 5 months, and this is where I'm agreeable. I definitely would look at variations to the months, and these are arbitrary, but this is my first thought, is that if somebody was to be awarded a grant, I think that you should have 5 months to lease the property. I'll give you up to 5. Then I think a follow-up criteria is 4 months to occupy, certificate of occupancy. So 1, I sign a lease, and if I'm a slick businessman, I'm gonna create a business and sign it to myself, right? But if I'm just in good faith, I'm trying to rent my property, I think 5 months is, if you're really working at it, you'll work hard and find an occupant or a tenant. I think you should have 4 additional months, so that's a total of 9 to occupy for certificate of occupancy. And I think that the business that takes that certificate of occupancy owes us 2 years. So we get 2 years out of that business. And as somebody who is the leaseor, I think that puts incentive to make you find a tenant that is as viable as you're going to get, and instead of just, okay, I'll throw somebody in there that's going to last a month. So I think that there's something long-standing. So that would be my recommendations for additional criteria. And for Mr. Atliff, for the property registration, I'm very much a fan of that. I think the CRA would be a viable test program for the city, so keep it as such. With the rationale of this, that twofold. One is that I believe that the overall intent is to see if we can get the vibrancy of our downtown going, which I believe has been collectively defined as what is outlined in our vision and our plan. And so in order to meet that plan, where we may have a few individuals or a minority of property owners that for some reason are not moving forward actionably towards that, this does 2 things. One is that, again, through code enforcement is a tool that whether we do it or not, it still is in existence. But one, I see that this would really, in my eyes, would help code enforcement, because now you've got people theoretically proactively registering, or there's another mechanism to say, no, we're going to identify your property. And I got to be honest, if I'm a property owner and I have to now go register my property because it's vacant, that's a real pain in the butt to me, and it may motivate me a little bit because I don't want to do that. And so that I would be very comfortable with that as a tool to move forward with and use the CRA as a test for that.
Member Nelson?
Well, first, I'd like to see a copy of the Houston ordinance. I'd be very interested in seeing what it says. So hopefully we can look at it and at least consider it. But the other thing that I was thinking is, we were talking about if it's not leased within a certain amount of time, they have to lease it within that period of time. But the other way to do it would be to say, if you don't lease it within 6 months, 9 months, you're only getting X amount of that grant money back. Basically, it has to be rented before you get the grant money. And if it takes you 6 months, you get 100%. If it takes you 9 months, maybe you get 80%. If it takes you a year, maybe it's 40%, and it's going down. So you're losing money, and you have an incentive to turn around and get that either occupied or leased. And that might be a way to do it.
I see no more lights. You're through?
I'm through.
Okay. I do have a couple minor questions on 2 items. Section 6, criteria mentions first come, first serve, and then it mentions competing applications. Unless I'm misunderstanding what you mean by first come, first serve, if it's first come, first served, how can you have a competing one until the first one's out?
That would be more for the grant applications that would have to come before the board. You may have, 2 or 3 before you that are for over the 10,000 amount, in which case, they're before you at the same time. And then you would need to make, and there's an insufficient amount of money, and then it would be up to the board to determine, to look at the criteria to see who should get that grant money based on their proposal.
Change the wording, because first come, first serve has to do with the date they give the application. So you should never have more than one you're looking at a time. You may decide something to do with that, but you have to get through the first one before you get to the second one if it's first one, first serve. It's like going into a store and you pick up a number. Your number is next. That's first come, first serve. Yeah. If that's not what you intend to do, then you should change the wording on it.
Okay.
The second thing is, in section 310, it says there shall include a minimum of $1,000 of landscaping. There may be some buildings and things that don't have an opportunity for landscaping. How can they perform something if they don't have an area for landscaping?
The intent of that was to make sure that if you're going to provide landscaping and want to get a grant for it, that it is somewhat substantial, that you're not just going to ask for a planter for a minimum amount of money and try to get reimbursement for it as part of another of the other items that you're asking for reimbursement for.
Okay, but does that mean they have to have landscaping?
It may not if they're in the downtown. I mean, that's just one of the items they're eligible for. They don't have to apply for a landscape portion of it.
Okay.
But if they are,
that's why it's a little confusing.
I mean, that's, not every application's going to have a landscape element to it.
I wouldn't think so, but it states in there.
But it says if you are,
you have to have a minimum.
You have, right. We want it to be substantial.
Okay. You might look at the wording on that one too, because I don't think it makes reference to that. It just says you must have $1,000 worth of landscaping. So maybe just take a look at it, Tim.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, I have another number up. Member Leedy.
I guess just so I'm not hung up on I want to just make a quick comment to some of the things that were said. I'm prepared to support what's in front of us right now. I think you guys did a good job. In terms of the clawback, Tom, that you're talking about, all I'm saying there is I'd like to see the staff come back to us in the next meeting with various ideas in terms of the leasing. I'm kind of sitting here resisting that. I mean, I've been involved in that industry all my life. And what we think 5 months is great. Well, what if he's not leasing it, he's selling it? 5 months, sometimes you can't even get a bank loan from a buyer in 5 months. So we have to be very careful on that. I mean, I understand, Tom, what you were saying. It's absolutely a great idea. But as I said, I'd like to maybe give it 30 days for you guys to come back, and we can always add it, right, to the, amend the document we're doing tonight?
That's what,
You have two options.
We
I
can?
mean,
Yeah.
right. I mean, we can adopt it tonight.
We can adopt the document tonight and amend it at another meeting to put this provision in, correct?
Yes, or you could just table it again, and we come back with wording about that
So,
item.
with regard to that, that's what I'm recommending. And then the third thing is, I agree with Member Behringer. Whether it's the CRA as a test case, I'd like to see us get all over this. What you were saying, Dan, about this is the fourth, fifth month Tom's been up here giving us ideas. Let's move that queen to checkmate place, you know what? So come back with an idea to, as I said, whether the CRA does it or the city, but I would sure like to talk about that.
Or based on, the presentation last month by Mr. Tollison of the Code Enforcement and Tom coming and speaking, the August agenda does have an item on it that will discuss code enforcement and possible enhancements to code enforcement. So we're already looking into that matter.
Okay. Well, the same kind of also the various cities that he showed us, that what they're doing, and whether they've had successes or.
We have looked at or researching different communities.
Okay. Good.
To look at those things.
Great. Thank you.
Member Nelson?
Well, before you got into that, I was going to ask this, which was, I guess that's how it'll work, is if we did something where people got the grant once the building is occupied, and say give them 9 months to get whatever project it is done and have that building occupied. And at that point, they would get 100% of the grant reimbursed. But say at 12 months, it would be 80%. At 15 months, it would go down another 20%. So the incentive is, if you want that total grant amount given to you, you need to get out there and hustle and get that building occupied. Would that work? Would that work for you?
Well, yeah, I guess if you asked me directly, but
Microphone, sir.
I'm just saying, Member Nelson, if you think about it, what if in the next, heaven forbid, but the market goes crazy here in the next 2 years from now? So now we're in writing again where it's very difficult for, I mean, I've seen markets where buildings are empty because of the market, not because of the incentivized of a city, or not because the landlord wouldn't want to lease his building. But again, I'm saying I'd look at that. I'd look at what I just mentioned.
Okay.
But I just think that's a kind of a whole discussion on its own, and maybe they can bring us back some ideas.
We could take those. Always take ideas.
Member Thies?
And from my point, and I pushed my button several times to talk, and then you asked a question about the budget, and you asked a question about can somebody double up. So everything was getting answered. But what I think is really important to note is that just the last meeting, we had code enforcement, and we're working really hard on code enforcement. And now this one, we have grant programs that I really like, that we're focused on these things that this city wants to focus on, and that's clean them up, move them out. And again, I go back to the analogy, boy, we know we want to move that queen, but it just won't move. And whatever it is we got to do to move it, let's move it. And I kind of agree with Member Leedy. I'm ready to take what you've got on the table right now. Let's move forward, because I want to move forward. And if we table it, we're not moving forward. But if we can amend it and get things moving, because I've heard several things up here that might be better off amended. I think Mayor threw some things out there that were pretty effective wording-wise. But I don't think we need to just stop and say, let's try this again. You guys have done a heck of a job.
And just a point, the two programs, the beautification program and the permit and impact fee program, they would not go into effect until October 1st. So we do have some time for that one. We were asking that the interior grant program, since that's already in effect, that possibly go into effect immediately. But based on the board, we can also wait until October 1st if that's your pleasure.
I'm for, whatever the delight of this group is that gets us moving forward and with staff's recommendation. I would also add to that, as I said, to start off, and I would like to end with, whatever we do here, I hope that we can use this as kind of a model to move into the rest of the city. Because we're very focused on the CRA, as we should be. That's what this group is. But there's a lot of things outside the CRA that I know we're working on. We just saw code enforcement, whatever the last meeting was. It's been a while. But anyway, that being said, I just want to move forward, and I appreciate all the effort you've put in.
Okay. My feeling on it is that we've given staff a lot of things to look at. I think it will be quicker if we table it, because we won't have to undo things and do things again. They can come back next meeting and deal with the items we've already given them. So I would suggest a motion to table this.
I would do a motion to table this until the next meeting. I think Mr. Ford's been given lots of directions and ideas, and he he might need some time to think about that.
And research some of those things,
And
like
research
the
some
plan
of
you want to see.
Yes.
Do I have a second to that?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Can I speak to the motion?
Yes, sir.
I agree with what you're saying. It's just, I don't want to confuse, and now I'm confused because I didn't want to table. I'm in favor of this tonight. We can always come back and amend this, but I also want to get in this thing, which should not be, you guys, about the grant program, and that is this vacancy information that Tom brought us tonight. That's a separate issue, and
They're going to look at all of that.
but it shouldn't be tied to this, I don't think. It
We
is,
can make
the
a
two don't
decision.
have, the
We can
two
make
aren't
a
related,
decision
you know
next
what I'm
time.
saying?
If you let me answer you, sir?
Yeah.
We can make a decision next time if that's the council's desire to do exactly what you said.
Right.
So there's nothing limited that. You still can go back and get the research done that we've asked them to do.
So we're going to have them look at this vacancy programs as well as
They're gonna
table
look-
this.
They're going to look
Okay.
at everything we told them.
All right.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, like sign? Passes unanimously. Next item, new business. We have no new business. Petitions and requests from the public. Does anybody wish to speak? Ma'am? If anybody else would want to speak, just come up front here so it takes a little less time. Yes, ma'am.
My name
it.
is Gretchen McMichael. I own McSweets downtown, bakery downtown. I'm also the president of the Downtown Merchants Association. As a member of the Downtown Merchants Association and part of the heart of CRA, we would like to see this voted on, take all the tables out of the room, amend it as needed. We need this done. We need this completed. We need this working. Maybe not working 100%. How many times have you ever voted on anything that's been 100%? I know I haven't. God knows it's just not the way it works. We aren't asking for perfection. We're asking for movement. We're asking for something to be done. We're asking it of you. And we're asking that it be done now. Please vote on this, up or down, so we know where we are and we know what we can expect. We would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Myjack, name and address, please.
Michael Myjack, Alpine Lane. I'm a member of the Titusville Environmental Commission, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the TEC to the CRA. We were instructed at our last meeting that you guys had voted to install an electric vehicle charging port over here across the street. And one of the things that we thought we would like to impart upon you is to take that a step further and install a photovoltaic system on the visitor center along with 4 charging ports, because 1 and 4 are almost the same price. Instrument it as the Florida Solar Energy Center had directed, And then we would be able to see over time exactly how much we're saving. If we put in a 10,000 kW system on that building, we will supplant about 85% of the power needs of that structure. We can finance that structure so that it doesn't cost the city any money. And in addition to saving money along the way, you'll know exactly how much you'll save. And you'll be able to use that data to apply to other buildings in the city. So we thought that that would be the next step forward. We wanted to impart that upon you guys to be able to do. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have in that regard.
Member Nelson?
I believe Mr. Larice indicated we're working on something for the visitor center.
Yes, ma'am. We have a request for proposal out for the solar, and the actual charging station is permitted and ready to be installed.
Does that work?
I'm not sure. We haven't seen it, so we don't know.
Okay.
That's why we have to wait to get the information on these
We don't have
things.
the information.
If we
yet.
jump in without the information, it just
Very good.
leads to problems.
All right,
every
thank
time.
you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak?
Stan Johnson, 860 Poinsettia Avenue. I have a card that I put out to you, and only on the front part, I'm asking you to bring to your attention. It's something you've likely heard before. It's the Rotary Club four-way test, and that's the test for the things that we think, say, or do. And I just want to remind you of this. I think it's an excellent thing to go through, and it has 4 questions. And I added some things on here that has nothing to do with CRA. So I'm just, for the CRA, I'm just asking you these 4 test questions. One is it the truth? Is number 1. And number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? I think those are 4 good tests that when you make decisions. Now, I have some special concerns about what is going on in the CRA, and that has to do with that you're looking into parking spaces and a parking garage with no specific plans for a sports complex or something that would justify the needs of putting in a sports complex, which would cost about $6 million. The $6 million was even put on the, has been even published, my goodness, over I think over 4 years ago. So it's a concern with what's going on with that. Now, and another item I'm concerned about is this was expressed in January and February of this year, and that is that we're about to fall off a cliff. And the word was also used, bankruptcy. That's at a city meeting, council meeting. So those words were used and phrases were used, and that's of a concern also because recently we had a meeting where the finance director came forward and she gave I believe it was a quarterly report and said everything is all okay. So these issues seem to be conflicting and of concern, and I just wanted to bring them to your attention. So that's all I have. If there's any questions, I'm here to entertain any questions.
I see no lights, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak? Not hearing anybody. Is there anything else from council? If not, we have finished this meeting.
Sir, we got one more item.
Oops. Oh, executive director's report.
Yeah,
Left you out, sorry.
It's just an update for the CRA board along with the spreadsheet, the activity spreadsheet in the back for your consideration. And subject to your questions, completes my report.
Any questions? I see none. Now, Coach, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Next meeting.